Hey, it's Brian and Chris here from Resolve Technology. And today we got Chris without his glasses. He's wearing his contacts today. So he's got some interesting things. This is a little bit on a little too technical for me as far as hardware goes, but he's got some news on the new i9 Intel chips, the CPUs that go into computers, right? So if you're on the cutting edge buying the new stuff, you may want to listen to this. It's the Gen 13th and 14th. Is that right, Chris?
Yeah, the i9 13th and 14th gen. I think it might just be the K series, which is an unlocked processor. Not like there's much headroom with that unlock capability anyways, but essentially what's going on here, this actually affected me as I have the 14th gen one. I had to reach out to Intel support back in February. Essentially, if you have a high-end NVIDIA graphics card doing CAD work, AI, things of that nature, you'd get an out of memory video or video memory error message or certain types of games or programs, mainly Chromium, so like Edge browser tabs, Chrome browser tabs, other types of browser-based apps like Discord. What was I'm drawing a blank, Brian. I don't know what Electron apps. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Were just suddenly crashing. And there's an Intel processor diagnostics tool past that, past all sorts of stress testing tools, things like OCCT, Prime 95, all the heavy overclockers or people with high-end workstations, pass all that, but certain DirectX related programs, just unexpected crashes and stability issues. There's tons of it, not tons, but there's a few videos on YouTube covering this. They think that maybe the way 13 and 14th gen was designed, something with the IO or something. I can't 100% speak on. I only briefly saw a few videos, but there are some things you can do to work around this. I'm still in contact with Intel support on this. But essentially, motherboard manufacturers like Asus, Gigabyte, MSI, their stock settings out of the box aren't so stock. So Intel has their own specifications for the thermal headroom, the voltages of the processor, the amperage, all kinds of different formulas, I guess you could say, on what's there on their spec sheet. Now, what's happening here is a lot of these motherboard manufacturers are jacking it up. The wattage, it's just letting it run wild, and you essentially got a toaster on your hands. But you got things like thermal throttling, and they're like, what's going on? I have everything on stock. So they're like, why is it unstable at stock settings? I paid $500-600 for this processor. So essentially, what you can do in that situation is you can actually go into the BIOS. So I downloaded some images. I'm going to just show my Asus BIOS here. And these are some of the settings you can change.
So while Chris is geeking out here, I just want to say, like, typically we don't do videos on gaming and things like that. But where Chris thought this would be interesting is, say you're an engineering firm, you're a small engineering outfit, you don't have a lot of IT resources. This might be something you run into if you go with an i9 processor. And we figured,
Custom build.
okay, Chris knows about this. He'll show you some of the things that he did with his system, which is a gaming system, not a CAD system, but it's the same idea. You're using the high-end graphics
Yeah.
cards. So this, you might want to watch this tweak here.
Yeah, so this is the BIOS. This is the few settings. I think I grabbed this off Reddit, but essentially you got to make some changes. So you can disregard this XMP tweak. That's just overclocking of the RAM, the memory. That's got nothing to do with what's going on here. But right here, this disabled and force all limits, that's something called MCE. Every manufacturer calls it something different. It tries to get a little more performance, preferably 3D rendering workloads, CAD workloads, things that require maybe high frequency or a high all-core workload. That also can instantly throttle. But essentially, what people usually do is they just go disabled and force all limits. That's usually enough. However, even with that, or Gigabyte has something called Intel Poor, and that should do the same thing where it should stick to Intel's specifications for that specific model processor, but it's not. As you can see on the second screenshot here, you got to get the name of this one. The specific name is, so you got to change the amperage. The core current limit is what it's called on mine. You got to set that to 307A. Depending on the motherboard, they're just out of the box at 405 to 511 ish, and that's way too high. And then also, you'd want to set the P1 and P2 power limits to the wattage of the processor. So 253 in this case for both of them.
Okay.
Now, The last part of this is you'd want to switch the SVID behavior, which has to do with voltages. So what Intel does, if you're troubleshooting this, you reach out to Intel support, you get no IT staff. They'll tell you to switch this. It might be on auto. They tell you to switch it to something called Intel failsafe. Essentially, that's going to pump tons of voltage to the processor. Like they're just assuming you have like a really low bin chip. They're just trying to rule out, so they overvolt it essentially, which I wouldn't recommend doing. It's probably going to overheat the second you boot into Windows. It's not a viable solution. But they also recommend you put it on typical scenario here. It might not be as causing as many issues. Now, the last part to all this is just one way of handling it. Intel also has something called Intel XTU. And I believe in one of these articles, yeah, right here. It's a tuning tool. You can overclock, you can underclock. Some application developers and vendors are recommending you actually go in here and downclock your processor. So you change the core frequency. So say it's 57X would be 5.7 gigahertz. They're downclocking it to like 5.3, 5.4, 5.5. And that removes whatever this Intel bug is, whatever's going on currently. And they also mention Intel is actively investigating this, but I'm not too sure when a solution that other than hampering the performance is going to come out.
So maybe the motherboard vendor will have a firmware update for the
Possibly.
BIOS,
That or
or
Intel ME or something along those lines. Yeah. Chipset driver update, one of those three.
okay. Okay, great. So be on the lookout for that. Hey, thanks for sharing that. I think that'll be useful, for some of those business CAD users out there, and
On custom
maybe,
builds specifically, and there's a lot
yeah,
of them.
custom builds. Yeah. Yep. All right. Thanks, Chris.
Yep.